We now present our next case, The People against Mr. Enter. He has been accused of being nothing more than a hater against modern Spongebob for repeatedly riffing on what he considers terrible episodes of the show, and never relenting on such things. Now please all rise for the Honorable Judge Service.
Mr. Enter, how do you plead?
Not guilty. I find myself a fair and unbiased critic of the episodes that I've reviewed. I may have a distaste for the show as a whole, but I'm more than a simple-minded hater.
We'll see about that. Since you have failed to appoint yourself an attorney, the court has provided one for you.
What could possibly go wrong?
No thank you, Your Honor. That won't be necessary. I didn't appoint an attorney because I'll be defending myself.
The man who defends himself has a fool for a client. But if you're certain, let the proceedings begin.
Mr. Enter has spoken about almost 30 episodes of this show, SpongeBob SquarePants, in his reviewing show, Animated Atrocities. In his one positive review of an episode, he stated just how much of a fluke that it was. If that's not a sign how clearly biased this man is, then I don't know what is.
Just because there are a lot of episodes I dislike does not mean that they're all bad, and it doesn't mean that I hate them without ration. There are some episodes that I like, besides Sandcastles in the Sand. There are some good stories in there, and some good humor.
Why don't we put it to the test?
Yes, that's a good idea. A very good idea. Why doesn't he give us his top 50 post-movie episodes? If he can do that, he'll prove, truly, that he doesn't just mindlessly hate modern SpongeBob.
You're being totally unreasonable. How can anyone point out 50 good episodes of a show that they don't like?
Well then, do you accept a guilty verdict?
Objection. I have a different proposition for you, Your Honor.
Where did you come from?
Very well, I'll gladly hear it.
Only make him find his top 25 episodes, but forbid him from using any Season 4 episodes. No Sandcastles in the Sand, and no filler entries. He has to find these episodes enjoyable.
An interesting idea. Season 4 is known as the last good season by his kin. Yes, let's let him decide his favorite true modern SpongeBob episodes, and only 25 of them, because I am indeed a fair judge.
Enter, do you think you can manage this? Yeah, I think so. Let's get started with number 25.
Yes, I await with bated breath.
Wow, that was actually kind of good.
I'm gonna be honest here. There aren't many of the typical safe choices on this list. You know, your Two Faces of Squidward and your Suction Cup Symphony. I won't say this wasn't by intention, since I do want to point out things that might miss in Admirable animations, and it wouldn't be fun if I was just praising things that everyone else was praising. Also, I can't wait to see how many of the episodes that I really like make other people really mad. Oh yeah, I really do like every episode on this list. It's just that some of them are really hard to talk about, like SpongeBob versus the Patty Gadget, one of the more obvious choices for this list. I mean, I like this, but I don't exactly know what to say about it. Most of that comes from the fact that it's a Season 5 short, and you usually get what you see with those. I suppose I should explain how it works where others have failed. Because they're so short, the writers usually have to rely on only one joke. In episodes like Boat Smarts and Pat No Pay, it doesn't work because the joke is too mean-spirited. While it's kinda mean-spirited here, the character who wins is the one who deserves it the most. Besides that, the narration and the style of how the episode is told gives this one its edge. More of the short should have taken notes from this one and have gone with different and interesting unique styles. Although, according to Boat Smarts, that doesn't always pan out.
Wow, that was actually kind of good.
One of the biggest problems that I find with modern SpongeBob is that he's become a terrible character, and that mostly seems to be because he has no good guidance in his life. Patrick is a sociopath, Mr. Krabs doesn't give a crap about life, Squidward doesn't give a damn about him, and Sandy is completely immoral in her pursuit for science. It's telling when the jerk jock is the best mentor he's got. When he actually has a good mentor like the original Fry Cook, and another choice a bit further down the list, it really works. It's also one of the few Season 5 celebrity cameos that wasn't totally wasted. Looking at you, Bowie. This is almost like a reverse Imitation Krabs, with Jim teaching SpongeBob how to make Krabby Patties the correct way. Instead of doing random gags, it's actually surprisingly serious. However, that isn't why this is one of my favorite modern episodes. It's because Jim gives lessons about more than just being a great fry cook, but lessons about life. SpongeBob will be a good fry cook, but he'll never be a great one as long as he works at the Krusty Krab, something that the future seasons have really made apparent. Also, this is one of the first times that it really felt like SpongeBob's job was on the line. It was fresh and new, before they beat it into the ground in the episode where SpongeBob changed his pants, and the episode where SpongeBob became a porn star.
Ready for my close-up, Mr. Director?
Very well.
Loose the pants!
Wow, that was actually kind of good.
I told you guys that there were very few safe choices on this list. Case in point would be Krabs a la mode. I know this isn't exactly fair, but certain episodes do taint my views of other episodes. Not to the point of considering them atrocities, but enough to make me feel slightly uncomfortable watching them. Let me put it this way. I'll never watch Krusty Love the same way again after watching Summer Job. Sometimes it's not that serious. I haven't touched upon this much before, at least not intentionally, but Plankton tries to steal a Krabby Patty formula is the most overdone plot in history. And on top of that, it's rarely done very creatively. I mean, in Season 8 alone, there was one episode where Plankton disguised himself as Sandy to steal Krabby Patty formula. Then he disguised himself as SpongeBob's grandma to steal a Krabby Patty formula. Then he disguised himself as Gary to steal the Krabby Patty formula. Yeah, it's kind of overdone. I tolerate this more if they put in some good comedy, and they really put in some good comedy here. So many of the jokes hit bullseyes. Plankton pretty much tries to turn down the thermostat in order to ruin Mr. Krabs' business, but SpongeBob and the others take advantage of it. Yeah, it's kind of weird that Mr. Krabs didn't notice or care that his restaurant was frozen, but that's not the worst thing he's ever done. I really don't know. I'm trying to talk more about these episodes, but they're way easier to like for what they're not than what they are. I suppose I should say this. It's a surprisingly solid episode and a breath of fresh air, not to mention that it's mountains above most of its kin.
Wow, that was actually kind of good.
No, not all of my choices are from Season 5. I've actually got selections from each season after Season 4, and no, that wasn't intentional either. This episode is weird, I'll admit that right now. The main plot is that Patrick and SpongeBob end up in a prison and they think that it's a summer camp. I mean, plenty of very stupid episodes have pretty much this exact same setup, but I think it really works here. For resisting the warden's orders, they're frequently put into punishment, but it doesn't affect them at all. And you know what? It works because they actually don't deserve the punishment. But their ignorance isn't hurting anyone, and you don't want them to be punished, and this allows the comedy to shine through. Speaking of which, I love this warden character. It's like they took the drill sergeant from Mrs. Puff You're Fired and upped him up to 11. I just love it when these tough guy types end up finding that what they're doing is totally ineffective. His reactions are completely hilarious. But my favorite part of the episode has to be that weird play thing at the end, and the warden definitely agrees with me on that.
Wow, that was actually kind of good.
See, I told you they weren't all from Season 5. Here's one from Season 8, which is actually my least favorite season. Treats feels a lot like an apology letter for episodes like A Pal from Gary and Frozen Face Off. On a tangent, why do people seem confused that I hate that episode? I mean, the entire cast is using Gary, a house cat, as a sled dog, but I digress. In this episode, SpongeBob tries buying Gary a new type of snail treat. He loves them so much that of course they run out fairly quickly. Then the rest of the episode shows that SpongeBob would literally go to the ends of the earth in order to find Gary some snail food. This episode isn't perfect by any means. Gary is constantly meowing, but it isn't anywhere near as annoying as, say, SpongeBob's laughter in an episode like Funny Pants. The ending is alright. I could see people either really liking it or really hating it. To spoil it, all SpongeBob has to do is directly say no, and Gary stops meowing. SpongeBob was kinda doing that throughout the episode, and he kinda wasn't. What allows me to look past that is being able to directly say no is a pretty good lesson. Sometimes people just won't fucking leave you alone until you do. It is a very relatable message.
Wow, that was actually kind of good.
We all know that a boating school episode can't end with SpongeBob earning his license. That's been established repeatedly throughout the series, and usually comes off as insulting in episodes like Nautical Novice or Bumper to Bumper, where SpongeBob has no good reason to abandon his new way of thinking. Enter the hot shot, the proper way to do a boating school episode. In this episode, a new student comes to school. He's the son of a famous race car driver, and obviously he's great at driving. He's so good that his techniques rub off on SpongeBob, and it actually seems like SpongeBob will pass. However, the race car's son actually turns out to be a bad influence when he gets SpongeBob to drive without a license, and eventually enter a street race. SpongeBob realizes this is bad and completely abandons the new way of thinking. If more modern boating school episodes were like this, instead of Bumper to Bumper or, God forbid, Demolition Doofus, I wouldn't really groan every time I needed to watch one.
Wow, that was actually kind of good.
I know that I'm going to get a lot of backlash for most of my choices, since there are very few modern episodes that are positive by the whole group consensus. But I'm probably going to get the biggest backlash for this episode. Patrick Man. Yes, I did a top 10 list of the worst episodes where Patrick was a prick, so obviously whenever he hurt someone I gotta hate the episode, right? Well, not exactly. For the first time in a really long time, Patrick's stupidity felt genuine. Let's think about this. It didn't even remotely feel malicious. Hell, it didn't even feel hedonistic. The basic plot is that Patrick feels like he hasn't accomplished anything, a la Big Pink Loser, and decides that he wants to be a superhero. He's just not very good at being a superhero, and that ends up causing a lot of trouble. This reminds me of another episode actually, Hall Monitor. In that episode, SpongeBob donned a hall monitor uniform and attempted to help people, but only ended up causing trouble. I mean, the worst thing that Patrick does is get Mrs. Puff arrested. But guess what? That also happened in Hall Monitor. I'd also be remiss if I didn't bring up the strangest scene of the episode. Mr. Krabs begins to help an old lady cross the street with no benefit to himself. The first time I watched this, I had to stop the video because I was so surprised. To this day, I don't know if I should be angry because that's out of character, or if I should be happy because that's out of character. Of course, he abandons her to chase after a loose dollar. However, Patrick Man stops him from picking it up, and the old lady gets the dollar. After like 5 seasons, they finally figured out how to do a joke revolving around Mr. Krabs being cheap. It took them long enough. Also, Patrick actually does get consequences for what he did at the end of the episode, unlike virtually every episode on my Patrick's a Prick list. Honorable mentions included.
Wow, that was actually kind of good.
I'll be honest, I tried to put at least one episode from each season after season 4 in this list. Don't worry, this list is exactly to my opinion. I didn't throw in any filler episodes, but it was kind of a personal challenge. And season 6 was the hardest to come up with any episodes that I truly thought were good enough to be one of my favorites. Now, season 6 doesn't have the most bad episodes, that'd be season 7. And it doesn't have the worst episodes, that'd be season 8. However, the good stuff in season 6 isn't really that good, with a few exceptions. One of those is obviously Sandcastles in the Sand, which I did a whole review on. And another one would be Not Normal. If I could describe this episode, I call it the sister episode of Patrick Smartpants. Instead of Patrick, it's Spongebob, and instead of stupidity, this time it's eccentric behavior. After being criticized by Squidward, Spongebob finally decides to do something about his oddities and pretty much changes his whole personality. He becomes his perspective of normal, having a completely boring life. Along the way, he learns that you shouldn't compromise who you are to meet other people's standards. It's a surprisingly solid episode. If there was anything I didn't like about it, it was that Spongebob started making Krabby Patties out of paper, which doesn't make much sense. If he started serving patties that just didn't have the magic that SpongeBob once brought to the table, then it would make a little more sense. But it's only one flaw, and otherwise one of the best episodes of season 6.
Wow, that was actually kind of good.
I don't think that I'm going to break anyone's heart when I say that the majority of SpongeBob specials kinda suck. That's not even a modern SpongeBob thing either. SpongeBob has always had a problem with them. I mean, Ugg is boring, The Sponge Who Could Fly is just, well, probably the inception of the Bikini Bottomites being assholes, and Party Pooper Pants, well, that's a whole separate review. Sure, once in a while you get episodes like Christmas Who or Dunces and Dragons, but the majority of the time you get things like Who Bob What Pants. But when they get it right, man do they get it right. Hello Bikini Bottom is one of the best post-season 4 specials because, for one, it feels the most complete. A large problem with the SpongeBob specials is that the plot isn't even large enough to fill an 11-minute episode, even with TV movies like Truth or Square. But the problem here is non-existent. The plot is constantly on the move. It always knows where it's going. The other large problem plaguing most modern specials is that Plankton way too often hijacks the plot, most notably in SpongeBob's Last Stand, where he turns a should-be environmental message into stopping the Krusty Krab from going out of business. Sure, Plankton is in this episode, but only for a couple of jokes. And they're funny. Yeah, that's another thing that I like about this episode. The majority of the jokes are funny. But mostly it comes down to the story elements that I like the most. Mr. Krabs is still a sheep as hell, but he gets punished for it. Everyone is in character and believable, even if Patrick didn't really have to be here. Also, the ending of this episode is how you do those half-ended episodes correctly. SpongeBob and Squidward start playing a song together, and it gets the crowd to cheer on. However, it's a meteor shower that made them cheer. But here's the main difference. SpongeBob and Squidward think that they did this, and it just ends off with a good feeling. Not to mention, best post-movie song. Yes, better than Gary Come Home. A side note, did you know that this is Aaron Springer's last episode before he moved on to Gravity Falls? Seems like he wanted to leave on a high note.
Wow, that was actually kind of good.
In this episode, a food critic comes in and says that SpongeBob is the best thing about the Krusty Krab. Mr. Krabs takes this to heart and starts merchandising the hell out of SpongeBob. This leads to the detriment of everything else, including the food that they serve to the customers, what people originally went to the Krusty Krab for. Holy shit, it's a metaphor for Nickelodeon!
Wow, that was actually kind of good.
It's kinda hard to talk about this one. It's just another very solid episode. The jokes revolving around Patrick and SpongeBob being spies are completely hilarious, and it gets every piece of the homage down correctly. I don't know if the ending is really clever or really stupid, but either way, it's pretty funny. Although having two Patricks running around is kinda horrifying.
Wow, that was actually kind of good.
Holy shit, they did it. After 5 seasons, they finally did it. What am I talking about? They actually did an episode revolving around Mr. Krabs being cheap correctly. Let me repeat that. They actually did an episode revolving around Mr. Krabs being cheap correctly. This automatically makes Season 9 an improvement. Yeah, I've been a little too harsh on Season 9. I mean, SpongeBob You're Fired, Little Yellow Book, and Squid Baby still line up with some of the worst of the series. But besides that, most of the episodes are getting back to the swing of things. Sure, there's a ripoff here and there, like Squirrel Record, but the other bad episodes aren't even that bad. But this episode specifically. First of all, Mr. Krabs' greed harms no one. Secondly, they had the Bikini Bottom Bank play the straight man to his greed. For example, when he starts talking about how much he wants the bank's money to come home with him, they flat out call the cops. He eventually gets locked in the bank and starts to go crazy. Unlike the episode Bubble Troubles, his insanity is played completely for comedy and not seriously. There are also some really nice break-in gags that they decide to do. But Mr. Krabs is really the star of the show here, which is crazy, considering that it's Mr. Krabs we're talking about.
Wow, that was actually kind of good.
You know who I don't think has been in a bad episode yet? The Flying Dutchman. I don't know. It seems like when the writers purposely use horror elements, they get it right. Take The Curse of Bikini Bottom. In it, SpongeBob and Patrick end up accidentally cutting off the Flying Dutchman's beard, and he turns them into ghosts. Not only is the plot solid, but almost every joke hits its mark. Yeah, you see why this list took a while? I mean, it's hard for me to say anything but the gags working and it being a really solid episode. Let me put it this way. It's easier to explain what's wrong with a broken machine than explaining why a machine is working correctly. I could point out most of the gags, like this one.
Please, Mr. Dutchman, we can't take it! Constantly moaning and groaning!
Invisible to the world!
Living without a soul!
It's miserable!
How could anyone live like this?
But that would kind of ruin the episode for the people who haven't seen it yet. And yeah, you should check out any number of these episodes for yourself.
Wow, that was actually kind of good.
Now this is an interesting episode, and all my good feelings about this episode pretty much come from catharsis. In it, after Squidward feels pushed around from working at the Krusty Krab, he leaves and starts working at the Chum Bucket. Apparently, he has a secret recipe that's able to make chum taste delicious. Squidward and Plankton make an amazing team up, and it really puts Krabs on the ropes. Now, there are episodes that come up like Gone, where if you hate the character that the torment is being targeted at, you'll probably get a lot of enjoyment out of it. However, in most of those other episodes, the characters have done absolutely nothing to deserve their torment. In this episode, Mr. Krabs screws up and gets the proper punishment for it. It's that one little thing that helps an episode become one of my favorites.
Wow, that was actually kind of good.
Did you guys know that SpongeBob SquarePants is, and I'm gonna give you a moment to let this bombshell sink in, but SpongeBob SquarePants is, in fact, a sponge. I mean, it's actually hard to remember him that way because the writers seem to have forgotten that in modern episodes. You know, we don't get many episodes like Suds anymore. I don't know, it seems to be a large part of what made up the show's original charm. There are only 2 modern episodes that I can think of, with SpongeBob being a sponge the main focus. One of them was Model Sponge, which essentially had SpongeBob be the sponge equivalent of a porn star, and the other one is The Abrasive Side. In this episode, SpongeBob is unable to stand up for himself, and so he gets himself an abrasive side, that green thing on the back of sponges that no one ever uses. This allows him to stand up to other people, and that eventually gets mean. Not only is the story extremely strong, but it's an episode that gets mean-spirited humor correctly, because an outside force is causing the meanness. Not to mention that there's a twist ending that I'm not even going to spoil for you here.
Wow, that was actually kind of good.
Holy shit, Patrick Star has a morality. Yeah, my favorite season 5 short isn't actually SpongeBob versus the Patty Gadget, it's the Donut of Shame. In this episode, Patrick steals SpongeBob's prize donut and actually feels guilty about it. That small thing alone guaranteed its place on this list. Now, if this was done with a little bit lower quality, it could have been Patrick simply afraid of getting in trouble, but he keeps saying things like, "That's SpongeBob's donut," and it's really one of the few episodes that look good on Patrick. Not to mention, this is kind of the reverse of season 4's The Pink Purloiner, which is probably the most solid in that season. Not the best, but the most solid. In that episode, SpongeBob thought that Patrick stole his jellyfishing net when he didn't. And in this episode, Patrick actually stole something and SpongeBob doesn't even consider it. That's a nice little nod.
Wow, that was actually kind of good.
Now, any number of these episodes, I can give their own Admirable animation review, and I probably will at some point. But this one, I've actually got one in planning that I'll be doing in December. This year I'm going to do a reverse of what I did last year. The Admirable animation and animated atrocity things will be switched. So I'll have a bunch of Christmas Admirables and a bunch of Halloween atrocities. So I'll be talking about It's a SpongeBob Christmas then. All you need to know right now is that what you've heard about this episode is true. It's a really good Christmas special that has exceptionally great claymation.
Wow, that was actually kind of good.
Hey, SpongeBob SquarePants did cringe comedy correctly. It's a bloody miracle. One thing that SpongeBob tries and fails to do frequently is cringe comedy. You know the episodes. The Splinter, Fungus Among Us, Slide Whistle Stooges, you know their kin. Here, however, the thing that causes the cringe is downright hilarious. I think Patrick's song is terribly funny. Not to mention that it's a much higher quality than most modern music. Now that's a cheap shot. But the basic point is that the characters are more in pain than the audience. That's how you do it. I don't know why that's so hard for so many writers to wrap their head around. And yeah, it's a little bit of a Patrick's a Prick episode, and that's what kind of holds it back, but there's way more good here than bad. And all of the jokes surrounding the song work. What more can I say?
Wow, that was actually kind of good.
I think that I mentioned this before, but SpongeBob and Patrick act way too infantile. Anyone can see that the writers are trying to make them act childish. Unfortunately, crying for hours on end and playing with baby toys doesn't make you act like a child. It makes you act like, well, a baby. But in all honesty, it makes you act annoying and tedious. And as the seasons went on, this problem got bigger and bigger, giving us episodes like Toy Store of Doom. But every now and then, they've captured some lightning in a bottle. Like with Roller Cowards. You want SpongeBob and Patrick to act like kids? Fine. Give them a situation that literally anyone can relate to. Like, say, getting up some courage to ride a huge roller coaster. Hell, I still have a hard time getting on larger roller coasters as an adult, and I'm totally petrified of going on looping coasters because of an unpleasant experience that I don't want to talk about. This episode is as relatable as SpongeBob has ever been, and it's easy to actually see their motivations here. Oh, by the way, I don't know why, but I love that ice cream bit. It's just awesome.
Wow, that was actually kind of good.
This is a Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy episode. No, it's not an episode starring them. It's an episode from the show within a show about the two superheroes back in their prime, and it gets the parody of it perfectly. I have only one question. Two, actually. Why haven't they done this before, and why haven't they done it since? The fighting is awesome, the jokes are awesome, and it builds upon what previous episodes have established. That's all I really have to say. It's an actual Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy episode. Do it again at some point.
Wow, that was actually kind of good.
Alright, you all saw this one coming. Plankton's pet is what many people point to as proof that Season 9 is an improvement over previous seasons. And I do think this episode alone is definitely worth considering. But let's talk about it and why it's so great. Well, let me put it like this. It defies everything wrong with bad SpongeBob episodes. No, really. It starts at the Krusty Krab and has the audacity to not turn out to be horrible. But beyond that, it managed to do what could be some extremely disturbing jokes correctly by letting the audience know what's going on. We know that Mr. Krabs isn't tearing apart a baby. We've seen that it's really Plankton trying to steal the Krabby Patty formula. It's definitely an improvement on that joke from Karate Star. Now let's talk about Plankton's pet, Spot, not the episode. His loyalty to Plankton is incredibly inspiring. And you know what? It helps shoot the status quo in the face. The episode doesn't end with Spot evaporating or something. It ends with him defending Plankton and still Plankton's pet. Yeah, you see guys, no matter what, the next episode will be back to the status quo. You don't need to have an incredibly insulting ending like in Plankton's Regular or Nautical Novice. One more thing before I move on though. Is Patrick being in the animal shelter why he was able to win Best Animal Sidekick in the Kids' Choice Awards? Because otherwise that makes absolutely no sense.
Wow, that was actually kind of good.
You know, I didn't know whether or not I can include this episode because, well, it feels a lot like a pre-movie episode. Actually, to be honest, I used to think that it was a pre-movie episode. Hell, it's as good as a pre-movie episode, and my second favorite SpongeBob special, second only to Dunces and Dragons. It's extremely genuine, and doesn't just paint Mr. Krabs as the good guy and Plankton as the bad guy. In fact, no one is really the bad guy. So if I do have all these good things to say about this episode, why isn't it any higher? Well, I don't know if this is particularly fair or not, but it is legitimately hard to watch this episode after so many episodes like One Course Meal or Plankton's Regular.
Wow, that was actually kind of good.
You'll notice that most of the entries on this list are really heartwarming. I'm a storytelling kind of guy. If you could tell a good story, then you'll generally have me hooked. And that's a large part of what turns me off of modern SpongeBob. I haven't done the math, but if I had to guess, like 30% of the episodes are Plankton tries to steal the formula through Zany Scheme X. I mean, how many of them have been on this list at least? But their stories can still be really strong when you try. Like in Friend or Foe, Plankton's Pet, and Single Cell Anniversary. If Patrick Star is my least favorite character in Bad SpongeBob, then Karen would be my least favorite character in Good SpongeBob. It's just how she constantly teases, nags, and berates Plankton after each and every failure. It's not funny. At best, it's so cliched. I mean, virtually every animated sitcom has their own version of this, and Karen isn't a parody of it beyond being a computer. But that cliche can do well when you delve into why the guy actually loves them, and what's going on here. In order to get a Krabby Patty, Plankton needs to give Karen an anniversary present, and we learn that Plankton actually values her more than just a machine. It all combines into a really sweet serenade that I never doubted was genuine. Never Give Up is my favorite modern SpongeBob song. This one is my second.
Wow, that was actually kind of good.
I adore this episode. Planet of the Jellyfish is as good as a Courage the Cowardly Dog episode. Actually, I wouldn't be surprised if I found something like this in Courage. Throughout Season 8, there were some running themes. One of them was Patrick being a prick. Another one was Plankton disguising himself as someone in order to steal a formula. And the other one was B-movie references, like to the Blob or in this case, Invasion of the Body Snatchers. In this episode, an alien uses a jellyfish to kidnap all the people of Bikini Bottom in order to take over the city, or maybe the world or something. It runs with the concept, and never did I think they went too far with the creepiness factor, because they tempered it with extremely good jokes. For example, the thing that destroys the aliens is mayonnaise, and they play with it some. It was the first episode in a very long time that I wanted to rewatch as soon as it ended. What could be better?
Wow, that was actually kind of good.
I'll put it simply, Perfect Chemistry is the funniest modern SpongeBob episode. And you know what the funniest thing about it is? It's entirely made up of fart jokes. Yeah, I brought this episode up in my Fart Baby review, because this episode is that one done right, minus the faux heartwarming shit. And you know what's even funnier? It's because it puts Squidward at the ass of all of its jokes. This one's gonna need some explanation. Number 1, Squidward isn't the victim of any malicious intent. Hell, not even really malicious coincidence. To put it basically, Plankton and Sandy begin working on a teleportation invention, and uses SpongeBob as a test monkey. Each time they try it, it ends up teleporting only a part of Spongebob. Squidward ends up seeing it and calling in Mr. Krabs. However, Spongebob keeps teleporting back, leaving a fart sound and presumably a terrible smell. It's hard to just say outright, because they keep varying it around. I like all of these episodes, and I like them all a lot. I mean, a lot. They line up with the classic episodes, which is why, unlike most people, I don't divide it by pre-movie and post-movie episodes, but good SpongeBob and bad SpongeBob. Which season they come from doesn't really matter. But back to the question at hand. If I like them a lot, and a lot of them, why do I keep picking on SpongeBob as a whole? It's not because I get more views from reviewing it. Honestly, I don't really care about that. And I get many more views from reviewing Teen Titans Go. Besides the fact that there are so many episodes, and they're easy to get, unlike The Simpsons, SpongeBob is fun to talk about, whether or not you like it or you hate it, because it's almost always interesting. I mean, when it fails, it usually does so in unique and different ways. I'm not reviewing another Sanjay or Craig episode, or another Fanboy and Chum Chum episodes, or I'll be saying the exact same thing I did in my first review. I mean, when I review To Love a Patty or All the Glitters or whatever, it'll be something that I've never said about the show before, and it'll be at least a unique experience. Maybe I have been a little too mean or malicious. But just know that it is a show that I have a lot of thoughts on. You want to see me be mean and malicious? Just wait till I start tearing apart more Family Guy or Toddler Titans episodes apart. The fact that there's still good episodes being produced here and there keeps the show miles above most of the other shit that I tear apart.
Short steps, deep breath, everything is alright. Chin up, I can't step into the